I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. Here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. It's Matt. It's John. It's Steve. It's the Sober Friends Podcast, and we have with us Gill Tietz of the Sober Powered Podcast. If you find us in the health and wellness category, wherever you are, find us, look up. That's where you're going to find Jill's podcast. What she does is she takes a look at the biological side of alcohol use disorder. She also lives an alcohol-free lifestyle. And if you're an aspiring podcaster, she's a podcast coach. Every penny that you give her is well worth it. And she's here to talk a little bit about her journey and about the big book, Doctor's Opinion. Welcome, Gill.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. We're going to butter you up before we ask the hard questions.
I like it. I'm not complaining.
Awesome. Well, tell us, qualify a little bit, as we might say in a room, and tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get to living an alcohol-free life?
Yeah, so I started drinking at 22. I didn't drink when I was younger because I was bullied for all of middle and high school. So I was never invited to any parties, which was very protective because I wasn't exposed to a lot of things when I was young. And when I was in college, I didn't drink. It was normal. So I just continued along with that. And then when I went to grad school at 22, that's when everyone else was drinking. The professors were drinking. We were having parties at the school. There were like bottles of liquor on people's desks. And I noticed really quick, like I was the weird one. And I was afraid that people wouldn't want to be my friend if I didn't drink with them. So I just started ordering what other people were ordering, which was a Bud Light in the beginning. I didn't know what people drank. And it took a couple times, but the first time that I got a buzz for real, I understood why everyone drank.
Was this like when you have a key that sticks, that you can't find it, but once you find that groove, boom, I can do that every single time?
Yeah. It was like, I have been missing out. This is the best thing that has ever existed in the world. Now I get why people do this, because before I was, I guess something else important to know about me is I was always really obsessed with being as thin as I could possibly be. And drinking and being thin don't mix. And I saw a lot of girls in college, they would get really drunk at frat parties, and then they would get the drunchies, and they'd like eat all this food or go to Taco Bell at night. And I was like, never, I will not do that because I don't want to gain any weight.
All right. So I'm hearing a whole bunch of issues that I think the newcomer can identify with. So I already can identify with that. You're the first person I've heard in a while that talked about I was drinking, but I couldn't find my groove. That was me. And I think I was an alcoholic from the beginning because I kept trying until I found getting drunk. And once I did, I couldn't understand why somebody would have just one. The other one is I can get very obsessed about my weight. That is a huge trigger for me. And I can if I put my mind to it, I could probably drop 60 pounds over the next couple of months. I won't keep it off, but if I have to focus strictly on it. All right. So there's whole bunch of things going on here. Boys, you want to jump in with some questions?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Joe. It's Steve here. And your story it's interesting to, I think, us. Certainly I know John's story and my story. We started drinking a lot younger, but I sort of get what I get what you had. Like I said, you were bullied, you weren't invited to those things. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why you did start at 22, right? Not only that, you had that experience. But how long, one of my questions is like, how long did your drinking career last? Like what was that? And what brought you to understand that it was problematic?
Yeah, so it was bad right from the start, Matt. I think I had a problem like right from the beginning too. It was there like the whole time, just waiting for me to start drinking. And then once I started, there was no control. There was no understanding of like how much alcohol you should drink. I just thought you should always have more. And if I wasn't drunk in that immediate moment, then I was okay to have another drink. And even though I understand how it works and, I'm not stupid, my mind was like, well, you're not drunk now. Like, you're totally fine, even though it's delayed. So I was always messing up, which is what I would call it, always getting sick, embarrassing myself. The first time I ever got sick from drinking was on a date. It was really embarrassing. So embarrassing. But he wanted to go out with me again, so I guess I'm not that bad. But it was really bad. It lasted a really long time.
Yeah.
It was Jaeger too, which is like,
ooh,
I feel like
yeah.
I didn't know.
Very familiar with it.
It was like
the
month
drinking and the
2
sickness.
drinking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Oh, yeah. They were hand
You were
in
doing
hand.
Jaeger in like your 20s, like 22?
People handed me
I did
shots
Jaeger,
and I
yeah.
was like, yes.
Sure.
I didn't know what it was. It was a redheaded slut shot. I was like, perfect. That's my favorite shot. Give me another one.
Right.
Yeah, I was. I can identify a lot. My first time drinking, in our schedule book here in Connecticut, there's the 20 questions of Alcoholics Anonymous to identify if you're an alcoholic. My very first time drinking, I could probably answer yes to over half of them. I did most of the drinking, so we were just a bunch of young kids. The drinking age in Connecticut was 18 at the time. I had a friend whose sister was 18. We asked her to get a bottle. Nobody knew what it was. I said, get a bottle of Fleischmann's whiskey, because that's what the old man drank down in the basement. So we got that. This is my first experience. And so we decided that we were going to go ice skating at the new ice skating rink in Enfield. So we went home and, so we're sipping on this thing. My buddy's taking a sip. I'm taking a guzzle. He's taking a sip. I'm taking a guzzle. So we go back to the house to get my skates, and the thought come across my mind. What happens if we run out? 15 years old. We had just started, and I'm worried about running out. So my father was sober at the time for probably 2 or 3 years. And in the cabinet in the front room in the hutch, there was a handle of Four Roses whiskey, the real good stuff. And I don't know why it was there. It was probably for relatives or whatever. So I got a glass jar and filled that up, and my buddy, he just took his sips, and I was guzzling that thing. I couldn't stop. And it took me a number of years to figure out. Once I got sober, I thought I was a high bottom drunk. I was comparing rather than identifying. And it wasn't until I started studying the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and getting into the doctor's opinion and getting into the stories that contain in the book, where I started to see myself. And it's like, yeah, I can see that. It's like, that one thing. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. And that was my whole drinking career. I mean, every time I drank, that's what it was.
Yeah, and what you said about the alcohol running out, that makes me so sad to think back on all of those times that I sat maybe at a big dinner with family, or if I was at the bar and the bartender wasn't paying close enough attention, and I started to get filled with anxiety that I wasn't going to get another drink, or there wouldn't be enough for me. It's such a sad feeling. And I felt that way all the time.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
The liquor stores in Connecticut used to close on Saturday at 8 p.m., closed all day Sunday. And I went in to find alcohol one time at like 7:50. And I remember the panic that I had. I had a few. And I totally remember that panic. What got you to the place where you decided to stop? Because I'm doing the math. I've heard your story. It sounds like you had a 10-year Hall of Fame, a short Hall of Fame career of 10 years. What got you to stop?
It was brief. It was actually 7 years.
All right. We're talking Sandy Koufax timing here.
It was quick. It was real bad. Yeah, I was a daily drinker by the end of year 1. So
Wow.
I didn't mess around with that. And then I drank every day for 6 more years. And every time I drank, which was every day, I guess. So every day I had this belief that adults drink, and people who are successful and professional and classy, they drink and then they stop. And if you get drunk, it means you're a loser and a bad person. And I really deeply believed that, but I just got drunk by accident literally all the time. I couldn't help it.
Right.
It happened most nights a week, and it always felt like an accident every single time for years. And I would wake up and I would hate myself so much for being a loser and not having control, and why can't you figure this out? I used to threaten myself with the word alcoholic. Like, if you can't figure out how to moderate and control yourself, you're going to have to quit drinking, and everybody's going to call you an alcoholic. And I thought, like, that would work and that would make me moderate. And eventually the self-hatred became so intense that I got really suicidal. And I think I stayed that way for about a year. I had 3 months where I didn't drink during that time because I thought I was going to cure myself. I didn't actually want to be sober. I just wanted to be able to drink and not feel suicidal afterwards. But as soon as I went back to drinking after those 3 months, the suicidal thoughts came right back, and they got really scary towards the end. And it would probably be about half my night, maybe 4 nights per week, that I would force myself to stay awake and think about what a horrible loser I am, and that, my husband doesn't deserve to suffer this way, and I should set him free. And I would say the worst things to myself. And that experience of stopping and seeing that the suicidal thoughts disappeared during those 3 months, though, that eventually brought me to acceptance that I just can't drink. And finally, like, after a very scary night, I realized, like, drinking for me equals being suicidal, and I'm risking my life by doing this. And then I just stopped on the spot.
This is, every time I hear it, because I've heard this story either on another podcast that you've told this to or your own, it's upsetting every time I hear this. And I can still hear the rawness in here. So if you're new, there's a couple things, if you're new, I want you to think about. The people typically on this show, me, John, Steve, we're at different levels of education, different places in our career. Jill is in a place where she's got a master's. She's a biologist, chemist. You would think successful, really smart person. You got to be smart to go to master's school. You got to be smart to be in this business. She's got the same affliction that you may have, regardless of where you are, whether you are homeless, 18, 50, a CEO, entry level. And I would almost make the case that this is an affliction that affects people more who are more driven, who are smarter.
It's one of the only diseases around that is non-discriminatory. It doesn't care if you're a male or female, young or old. It doesn't matter on your color, your religion. It doesn't care. It just wants to grab a hold of you, latch on, and never let go. And it's a battle once it gets there. And you're right, Matt. There's in the literature that, from the AA literature, there's a, as you go around, for me, as I look at the people in the room and I hear them talk, it seems like the vast majority of the people that are in 12-step recovery there's a lot of them that are very successful, very smart, very driven. And once they they put the plug in the jug, or they put down whatever their substance they were using, and they start channeling that energy into their career, they usually get catapulted into a new dimension of their career level, because now they don't have that anchor of their disease holding them back any farther, and they go on to do unbelievable things. And it's, I've watched them over the years. People just, they're coming in off the street, down and out, have lost everything. They regain themselves, they get a job, and they work like dogs, and you see them climb up the ladder, and they become a success story. It's all because recovery works. It really does.
Yeah, I think I think we've all seen that you can come into this program, or you can come into this addiction, and that could be a problem. Being too smart, being too intelligent, thinking, "Oh, I've been able to figure out all of this other stuff in my life, right? I mean, and yet I can't figure this out." And I know I struggle with that. I tell the story from my own perspective, is that I have a brother who was a very low bottom drunk. And I laugh at that, because I don't think I can judge my, I would say the same thing. Oh, I think I'm a high bottom drunk. And I've come to the realization is you can't ask me that. You know who you want to ask? Go ask my two wives who went through that with me, and let them tell you if my drunkenness was low bottom or high bottom. They have a different perception on it than I have, right? Neither one of them think that I was a high bottom drunk, because they lived with it. So, but I have talked to people, and there's one guy who was a very successful, John and Matt, you know him, but he came in, a while back, and he was new, and he's a sales guy, really driven, just one of those guys, very driven, very successful. And I remember him coming in, and I caught him after a meeting, and we were talking about it, and he was saying he needed a sponsor, but he didn't know how to get a sponsor. And I remember talking to him. We talked for about an hour after a meeting once, and he said, I need a sponsor who I could relate to. Like, he was talking financially and sort of business wide, and I laughed, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that that's what you think, but I said, you don't, right? I mean, you need, and it turns out his sponsor is nothing like him, right? When he finally figured it out.
Not even close.
Not even close, right? And I just remember having that conversation with him, and I'm like, no, you don't. You don't need that. You need something different. But that's what we could struggle with, right? That whole thing of, why can't we figure this out? Why am I able to go on? I have an electrical engineering degree, right? I've done all this stuff. So why can I do all that kind of stuff, but I can't figure this thing out? So, yeah, I think it can be a problem for some of us.
So let's talk a little bit about the disease. I gave you some homework, Jill. I gave you the doctor's opinion in the big book of AA, Dr. Silkworth. If you've ever seen Dr. Silkworth, total babe hound, this guy. He looks like you might think he looks. And I'm probably going to get into some heresy here. The big book thumpers might be a little angry at me, because I don't buy everything that he's saying about the allergy. You guys can jump in a little bit more, because I think you were paying more attention in the Joe and Charlie's that I do. I think the big thing that he's trying to bring up here is there's an allergy in the body, for lack of a better term, that the processing problem with an alcoholic is different. It breaks alcohol into acetone a little differently, which is the thing that causes the physical craving, and it becomes this doom loop, along with a mental obsession. I do believe that there's something wrong in the body. I don't know if there's a medical test that's going to show more acetone in my body than if I'm drinking, but I think he's one of the first people to say, no, there's something physically wrong with these people, which is a good thing to say, because it brings you past, these are weak-willed people. But this is what you do for a living. This is what your podcast is about. What say you?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot since we talked about it, and I understand where the allergy is coming from, but I think that there isn't a problem in the way that we process alcohol. We process it way too good, which is why we can drink so much of it, because like people from East Asian descent, they will more commonly struggle to process alcohol, and that's where the Asian flush comes from, where they get very red, headaches, they feel very nauseous, very tired, like they feel sick when they drink. It's like they took antabuse. That's someone who's intolerant to alcohol, and that's what that would kind of show up as. And people who can drink the amount that we can drink and the frequency that we drink, we're like champions of processing it, and our bodies can do it really, really well. That's why we can drink so much of it. Like for me, I was a daily drinker, and there's a lot of people in the community that they were binge drinkers. I feel like that's way more common than daily drinkers, at least on Instagram. And they are binge drinkers because they had multiple day hangovers. So they couldn't drink because they felt so bad, the next day and even the day after that. I've never had a multiple day hangover ever. And I would have hangovers. Most of them would fade by noon. Mm-hmm. And then I would, be ready to go by the afternoon. And that's because I haven't tested it or anything, but my hypothesis is that my body is just really, really, really good at processing alcohol. So I don't get any of these intermediates. So alcohol is eventually broken down into carbon dioxide and water and just, released from the body. I don't get any of these intermediates that build up and make me feel bad. Whereas other people who maybe get multiple day hangovers or they feel tired or headachy when they drink, they would have more intermediates hanging around making them feel terrible.
That's an interesting theory. And listening to you describe it, I'm looking back at my own history, and I been hungover? Oh, absolutely. But as I think back, it wasn't a lot, and I like your theory because it makes sense to me as well. Because the amounts of alcohol that I drank, sometimes I don't know how I lived, how I made it out alive, and and we got to, getting back to the doctor's opinion, we got to keep in mind that this was written back in 1934, 1935. And originally Dr. Silkworth didn't even attach his name to it because he didn't want to be associated with a bunch of Looney Tunes, because it could ruin his career. It wasn't until after the AMA declared it a disease that it came out of the woodwork and said, hey, that was me. And the allergy, I think that was, the what they understood back then. That's all they knew. They didn't have the science and that we have today, these 75, 80 years later. And to Matt's point with the big book thumpers, the people that really get into the big book has been unchanged from the doctor's opinion in the first 134 pages since 1935. 1939 when they first wrote it, and it's been unchanged. So that technology, what they understood at that time, is still being preached today. But I like that theory. It makes sense, because if we didn't break it down, if we didn't break down the alcohol with the enzymes and the these big terms.
I thought you were paying attention to those Joe and Charlie's.
Acetaldehyde, dietetic acid, and acetone levels as it goes down through the spectrum. Joe and Charlie were saying that we couldn't break down the acetone in an efficient way, and that would then trigger the phenomenon of craving. So the more the levels of acetone came up in the body, it triggered that we wanted to put more and more and more. I understand it, but I like it that we're just super efficient at doing it, because how can you explain it any other way?
Yeah, it's hard to drink like that. It takes a lot of dedication.
Oh, it's easy.
And if you well, if you feel horrible every time, I don't know, like if you guys have close experience with a normie, but I'm married to a normie.
Yeah, me too.
And
yeah, me too.
I see him when he drinks, he has like 2 beers and then he needs to go take a nap.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
If that's your experience, and then if you have 2.5, you start to get a headache, you're not going to drink that much. But if you're over here, like me, and I feel fabulous, and the more I have, the better I feel, then it's
Right.
easy for me to
Yeah.
want to do that every single day.
Oh yeah.
It's the old saying: if 2 make me feel good, and 10 is going to make me feel 5 times as better, right? I mean, it's just math. But yeah, you say Joe and Charlie, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they do this big book study, and they talk about exactly what you said. That normal drinker, after 2 drinks starts to feel a little weird, right? And they don't particularly like that feeling, right? And that's the difference between them and people like us, right? I'm like you, and what I just want to go back to something you said, because it happened to me all the time. You said I got drunk by mistake, right? And I used to get drunk by mistake so often because I would drink so much in such a short period of time. I was a huge tequila drinker that I could do shots of tequila. I mean, I could do shots of tequila like I could do shots of anything. And I could do 4 or 5 shots in 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden, I have 5 shots of alcohol in me. And in the meantime, I'm nursing a beer or 2. And all of a sudden, I am really, really drunk. And it's amazing how many times I did that to myself, right? Like I said, by accident. It wasn't by accident because I was doing those shots. And then I certainly knew that was going to happen. But yeah, so that Joe and Charlie does talk about that. I watch my wife too. It drives me nuts. Like my wife will go out to a restaurant, and I'm like, we paid for that half a glass of wine. Drink that glass of wine before we leave.
Wine's not cheap at a restaurant.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like, no, don't leave it behind. Drink it.
Yeah. And their little analogy of the guy on the plane that orders a cocktail and they give you the little bottles and he pours it in over some ice, and he just he pours half the bottle in the glass, puts the rest of the bottle in his pocket, and just sits there for an hour with a swizzle stick just twirling it around and not even drinking it. And Charlie calls it alcohol abuse because, it's like, it's there, drink the damn thing. It's so much of what's been said here tonight is just bringing back so many memories, and it's like, wow, how the hell did I live that?
So let's get back to the alcohol and the recovery part. So Joe, you woke up and you decided, I can't do this anymore, right? I mean, that's basically what you said. I can't do this anymore. What happened? What happened after that? I mean, how'd you go through it? I mean, you're drinking every day, withdrawals, physical. Was it a struggle? Some people do that and they never look back. I mean, how'd that look for you?
Yeah, so I hadn't actually been to sleep that night when I made the decision. It was 5:30 in the morning, and I was doing one of my all-night hate myself sessions, and I just stopped. I associated alcohol at that point with dying, so I just stopped. There was no consideration. Has it been long enough? Maybe I can drink normally now. Maybe I wasn't that bad. I've had those thoughts, of course, because my brain, is kind of weird from having this problem. But every time I do, I'm like, no, you can't, because I know what it means. And I didn't have bad withdrawals. I knew kind of what to expect because I had done those 3 months. That was about 6 months before I quit. So I knew that nothing horrible was going to happen to me. But I had insomnia, really bad night sweats. My emotions were all over the place. I was very agitated. Things could set me off really quickly. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of physical issues. Thankfully, I wasn't physically addicted. But I just kind of toughed it out for the first few months. I still maintained this belief that I wasn't like everybody else. And I didn't need support like other people do. And then, I was going to happy hours for work because scientists drink a lot. So there's a lot of happy hours. And it was the holiday season, so there were even more than usual. And I would leave, I'd get in my car and cry. But, I stayed sober. And then quarantine happened when I was 4 months sober.
Ooh.
And I thought, like, okay, well, might as well go to therapy now because I don't have to try to sneak out of work or be weird about it. I'm just home. So then I started actually doing stuff. And then I think it wasn't until somewhere between like a year and a year and a half when I attended my first meeting. I was really scared of it for some reason. I still am. I'm very scared to go in person, which is something that I want to do very soon. But I'm scared that, I don't know, someone's going to recognize me, which like, who cares? They're there for the same reason.
Right.
But it's just a big barrier to go in person. But I do go online occasionally.
Yeah, there's a lot, and we know a couple of ladies that have recently got sober. I know one in particular, and I've asked her if she wanted to go to a meeting. There's the campfire meeting that a friend of ours has at his house, so it's very informal. But I think you speak to it of the fear. I think a lot of that fear is if I go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, then I'm an alcoholic. I'm less than. I'm no good. I don't deserve anything, and I've been sentenced to a life in church basements with. I love Matt's analogy with guys in a trench coat and a single incandescent light swinging from the rafters, and a lot of that fear comes from it's unknown. You've never been there before. You have no idea who's going to be there, what's going to happen, who's going to know you, who's going to say, hey, I saw so-and-so at an AA meeting, so she's an alcoholic or he's an alcoholic. There's a lot of fear there. It was fearful for me too. So, as you were going through your studies, you got your bachelor's degree, and then you went on to master's, and you were drinking all this time, and you were studying this field of biology and chemistry. And not that you knew better, but you could understand the alcohol's effect on the body, but yet you still drank.
Yeah. And we actually use 70% ethanol to sterilize surfaces and sterilize our equipment. So I really knew, and I was still putting it into my body. Yeah, and that's where a lot of people find support in things that tell us that alcohol is a poison. And this whole idea of once you find that out, you won't want to drink it anymore. But I knew that the whole time. I knew and didn't care. So that kind of support never helped me. But yeah, I just thought, I'm different from everybody else, and I can find a way to control it. And I never thought much of it. I just thought someday I'm going to be a drinker like my husband, and I won't have to worry about it.
Hey, I love hot dogs, and you could tell me whatever is in hot dogs, and I mean it. Like you could tell me like they whatever, and I would say I don't care. I don't care because when I eat them, they make me happy, and I don't eat a lot of them, but they do. I love them, and it's like people say, "Oh, do you know what they put in there?" Like I don't care. You could bring me to the factory. It won't matter to me. I'm just telling you, it will not matter. So, yeah, listen, I was destroying my life. I knew I was destroying my life. I just gave blood this week, and I hit 7 gallons. And there was a time where they kicked me out of giving blood because my liver enzymes got so high. And I was really, really active, and I loved giving blood. I mean, I love giving blood. It's fun. I feel really good when I do it. And I remember getting that letter saying, you can no longer give blood, and saying, man, I'm in big trouble. It didn't make a difference. It did not make a difference to me. Like I knew I was poisoning myself, and I was just at a place where at that time I could do nothing about it. So, and just go back to your thing. The fact that you came in at the time where, lockdown happened and all the isolation happened, and being the fact that you're sort of a technologically advanced person, right? I could see, like, I have a guy who I'm doing some work with who, we're just talking about the whole new the Zoom community that's out there, and it's out there to stay, right? It's not going away. And I do think that there are people who will spend their whole sober career doing mostly Zoom type stuff, that they don't need the person room. Like they're okay with that. I still like the in-person stuff. I still like going to it, but I get the fact that that's out there. And I also want to say that just like this other fellow who thought he needed a special sponsor, I can remember, I started saying, I had a brother who was a low bottom drunk. And I remember when I first came into the rooms, I thought I needed different meetings than he needed. I can't go to the meetings he go to. I have to find the meetings that meet my standards. And today I laugh at that today, right? I mean, a meeting is a meeting, and I get what I need. If I'm willing to listen and show up, I get what I need.
Gill, you started your podcast is not that old, and it's pretty successful. So how the hell did you get to a point where you've got a successful podcast pretty quickly and a consulting business where the stuff you've given me has been pretty damn good as somebody who's listened to podcasts, at least for a long time? What got you into that? And how did you get to this place of, I can teach this too?
Yeah, so I started learning, just I wanted to know, why did this happen to me? My husband drank a lot with me. He partied with me most days. Why could he switch to water and I destroyed my life? Why was I obsessed with alcohol and he wasn't? So I just started learning about it. And then quarantine happened and I had even more time to learn about it. So I started reading papers every day, learning about what happens in the brain, why we are different from other people. And I was doing that every day for 7 or 8 months just on my own. And it was really helping me. It kept me away from trigger times. And I think changing your lifestyle in the beginning is really important, and not just doing the exact same thing, but removing alcohol. So it completely changed my routine. And then one morning I woke up and I was like, I got to share this with everybody. Everyone needs to know this information, because I wasn't seeing it everywhere. I was seeing a lot of false information, which I'm hesitant to correct unless I correct it on my own podcast, then I don't care. But I see a lot of false information on social media and things like that. And I'm seeing it. I'm like, well, that's not true though. And I knew that I could educate people on the truth. So I just decided I should probably make a podcast. And then I just did it that day. I didn't really think much of it. I didn't know how to do it. I Zoom called myself because I didn't know how to record. And I just launched it. And nobody cared because no one knew who I was. I had 0 followers. And I just kept putting it out there and working at it every single day. It's my new obsession. And eventually it started to pick up.
Yeah, I think you're going to take down Dave Jackson as the podcast guru type person. I love it. I highly recommend Gill's podcast, the Sober Powered Podcast. Her website is soberpowered.com. She is all over the place. She's on Instagram in a way that I don't think I can keep up with. I don't know how she does this stuff, but her Instagram game is good, and I am trying to keep up. What else? What else is worth plugging for you?
I'm also on YouTube. Someday
right.
I'm going to write a book. So if you're listening to this far into the future, maybe that has happened. Yeah, I think just more recovery work, because it helps me to do this work and to learn and understand, because the shame was really powerful. So learning why it's not who I am, it's more just a bunch of risk factors coming together to create a problem. It's not that I'm a weak loser. Helps. So I'll always be doing this work.
Awesome. Well, that's why we do it. It's our best meeting of the week. We got a new review from Apple Podcasts. Mark gave us 5 stars. I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic with 35 years of sobriety. I really appreciated your talk this week on doing things in moderation. I found your podcast about a month ago. I'm going back through all the earlier episodes. Thank you for what you do, Mark. Thank you. We love that feedback. You can give us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can do it on Spotify now. You can give us stars there. So please do that. You can find us. I've simplified everything. It's all Sober Friends Pod, soberfriendspod.com, at Sober Friends Pod on all the big social media sites. It's pretty much Instagram. The other ones kind of suck. Jill, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This was awesome.
Oh,
Thank
loved
you
it.
for having me.
Thank you.
You're
Jill.
welcome. We will see you all next week. Bye until then. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.